Alright, hi, so in this video I'll be looking at a few of the problems I came across in the project since the previous deadline. I don't have time to go over everything, but it should all be in the forum anyway, just in case something happens to this video. After the problems, I'll be looking at comparing it against some of the artists I've been using for inspiration over the project. And finally, I hope to post some industry feedback. Okay, I'm going to quickly go over a few issues I had with the texturing process. To start, I'll just look at my polypaint, which I just basically wanted to get a few of the colour zones down, and I used a mask by cavity to get a bit of depth information in there, as you can see around the scales and the wrinkles now. After this was done, I tried to bake the normal map out using Max, but due to the sheer amount of polys I had, it crashed every single time. So I eventually used XNormal to bake all the maps out. This tutorial by Michael Pavlich, which was really helpful, and that gave me this normal map. I mean, it's not perfect, there's a few errors. I mean, this tongue was a complete mess, and like where things are quite close, like the teeth and the fingers, I had a few errors there. Most of these were solved with the clone stamp and blur brush, but this tongue was such a mess I had to replace it entirely. I used this bit of the mouth here, as you can see on the finished map. I also baked out a cavity map, you can see here, for use with the diffuse texturing. Although the problem was here, I kept getting the same error with this and the diffuse and the specular I eventually baked out. I mean, I could have avoided some of this by moving the tongue in the model or baking it out separate. Next, I had a problem with trying to create the specular map from this diffuse because of the variation in contrast with the red and the yellow. To get around this, there was a technique mentioned in that tutorial whereby you could actually use polypaint and ZBrush to paint out a specular map on the model itself and then render it out using XNormal. So I did that, I gave it a quick specular paint coating, rendered that out with XNormal, and it gave me this, which doesn't have any of the contrast in that the diffuse has, which kind of solved the problem for me. And the final kind of issue I had was the gloss map. I mean, I was a bit confused regarding this, so my original gloss map was just a slightly altered version of the specular map, which turned out to be kind of the wrong approach. I found this useful post on E3D which kind of explains the whole process and what a gloss map is supposed to look like. So I eventually changed this to the blocks of whole colour, which gave me this. And with the gloss map complete, I gave the diffuse a few final touch-ups around the claws and mouth area, which gave me my finished diffuse map. The creation of the cat rig wasn't too difficult, though in hindsight I could probably have used an extra spine bone here for reasons I'll go into later. With the rig set up, I linked it up with the game mesh and a skin modifier, and gave it a cat motion layer so I could see how the mesh was handling the deformation. As you can see here, this was a fairly early attempt, and a lot of these problems were solved by absolutely weighting some of the vertices to these bones, like the foot here. Some of these are linked to the fingers there, so that was what was causing every problem. This portion down here, though, between the crotch and the ribs, this was quite time consuming to fix because of the weighting along the rib cage there made it quite solid, so I had to blend the legs between the leg and this bone here, which shouldn't really move, and the rib cage, which shouldn't really move either. So there's an awful lot of movement going on in this area here, which, as you can see if I scrub it along, was getting quite badly deformed. In the end, it just really took a lot of tedious hand weighting and playing with the weights table to get it sort of looking relatively good. I mean, this bone down here still moves, but it's an awful lot better than it was. I also relied quite heavily on this tutorial series from Fritz Studio, which basically covers the whole workflow of creating a cat rig, skinning it, getting it into UDK, and setting up the anim trees, and getting the cat to working in game. It was really pretty invaluable during this project. As inspiration for the walk cycle, I used one of the artists I've been referencing in the project, Julian Romeo, who's done quite an awesome Velociraptor walk cycle here. I tried to mirror it with mine, but the end result doesn't quite match up, as you'll see. Eventually, with the walk cycle and all the maps complete, I applied all the textures as a material with a real-time shader to see how the materials were handling the movement. And if I just give this a quick play, you can see it's moving an awful lot smoother with the fixed skin modifier. And the bone down there does still move a little bit, but it's pretty good walk cycle. When I originally imported the mesh into UDK, I had a few problems with it. The first being it's a couple of feet off the floor and the rotation was off, so it sort of chased you around sideways. These were easily enough fixed though by changing rotation and origin positions. Secondly, I had a problem with the animations I'd loaded in. For some reason the tail didn't animate at all and the left fingers were pretty smashed up. I found the reason for this was I went back into Max and looked at the names of the bits that weren't functioning properly, and sure enough they didn't have correct names. I think I renamed these to Spine Tail 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, but they're originally named Cat Rig Tail 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and for some reason they wouldn't work with those names, and I'd misspelled left fingers, so that was the cause of that problem. Secondly, I spent quite a lot of time in this Fizz asset trying to reshape the bones so that the collision reacted more realistically when the dino was killed, for example. I mean, it's not ideal, it's all in one piece and it's not flying all over the level, so it's decent enough. Taking a quick look at my body material setup, it's pretty simple stuff. I just added in a multiplier and some single vectors so I could have more control over the specular power and play with the values until it was about where I'd wanted it. So there's like a sort of a nice sheen on the skin and a really shiny inside the mouth where it's supposed to be like more wet looking. The eye was a bit more complicated. I used a sky texture with a reflection vector on it and a multiplier with a single vector in it so I could control how much sky was being reflected, and also 2 single vectors for the specular and gloss map with a really high value, and a noise texture sample so I could get a sort of scattered highlight, as you can just about see there. One of the main gripes I had with Dinosaur once it was set up was the speed it was moving in level. It was going way too fast for its size because it's quite small, so I went into the script file and edited the speed to be a lot slower, but still the walk cycle I'd made for it was it looked ridiculous with the speed that it was going. So thanks again to Fritz Studios tutorial series. I added in a quick run cycle and some directional movement for the walk and the run cycle, as well as this blend by speed node, so the AI or player can decide how fast the dinosaur is going to go based on the current situation. So if I just scroll along a little bit, these are the walk animations. They sort of blend into each other if you move this along. So it's got a side step and a backwards walk. There we go. And this one, the run, it's pretty simple, but it's the same sort of thing. At least you've got some kind of control over which direction you're going in. To test the dinosaur on the level, I created a simple bit of Kismet, which basically spawns 6 of them on path nodes on a 3-second respawn timer. Give this a quick try. I'm playing as a dinosaur killing dinosaurs. They all seem to be moving appropriately. And yeah, fantastic. Taking a quick look at my original sculpt, which was based loosely on this sculpt here by Julian Romero. As you can see, he's sort of gone out of his way to make this as accurate as possible. There's a lot of muscle definition and surface detail. I did try to replicate this with mine, but with sort of a saggier skin, a bit like a Komodo dragon. And it worked to a degree, but as you can see, it's still lacking a lot of that subtle surface definition. I got some feedback on this, suggesting I try and bring out the muscle definition a bit more, and add some more alpha detail in to make the surface a bit more interesting. Kind of as a starting point for this, I used the work of Kevin Bryant, who's working on the Primal Carnage game, to try and get a bit of a better idea of what I was doing. As you can see, he's got sort of tougher scales around the harder bits, like the ridges of the head and on the flanks, and sort of smaller scales along the underside, and where it's likely to be a bit softer, as well as wrinkles around wherever there's likely going to be bends occurring, like around the legs and the joints. So I went back and had another go at the sculpt, and eventually came up with this, and it's got similar sort of ideas in it. I've got harder scales along the back and sort of ridges around the head there, and sort of wrinkles around the joints, as well as some smaller, smoother scales on the underbelly there. Taking a quick look at Alex Shapland's work, who's also done a Velociraptor. She's done quite a good job of bringing out the anatomy both with the sculpt and the texture. The muscles really seem to pop out, and the skin definition is pretty good as well. And while this is more of a sort of stylized kind of anatomy, mine's a bit more traditional. As you can see here, the muscle definition is still apparent, it's just lost a bit under all the alpha detail. As well with Alex, she doesn't seem to have many seams in the model that are visible, whereas mine's got a couple of nasty seams like at the top of the leg here and around the feet. And that's really all I've got time for in this video. If I do get any feedback from the forums I post my work on, I will be putting it on the forum instead of this video because I don't have any time left, unfortunately.